Unless we set the record straight concerning the historical events of 1940, regardless of how painful the truth might be, the authority of the Communist Party of Estonia cannot be restored, nor can we make the plans that would enable us to move ahead.
Ning kavandada edasimineku uusi ülesandeid.
The Supreme Soviet adopted a decision that declared Estonia's entry into the Soviet Union to be null and void. A formulation was added stating that this should not be construed as secession from the Soviet Union. How can we protect ourselves from the danger that we might end up situated outside of the borders of the USSR, which would place us under the influence of the nationalistic separatists of the Popular Front? There is but one way out of this. In accordance with the Constitution of the USSR, we have to create our own autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic in northern and northeastern Estonia.
Автономную советскую социалистическую республику.
In anticipation of the 70th anniversary of the Tartu Peace Treaty, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet convened the plenary meeting of all people's representatives from all levels at the Tallinn City Meeting Hall to declare Estonian independence. The event helped to draw the attention to the wish for freedom both domestically and in foreign countries. The majority of the votes at the plenary session belonged to delegates who were partial to Moscow. The participation of soldiers contributed to their having the votes that they needed. Veljas was able to hold them in check. They couldn't openly oppose him. Still, it needs to be said that the inter-movement and other such things weren't local phenomena. These were movements organized in Moscow. There was an organizing section within the Central Committee of the party. Now we can say it, without beating around the bush, that it did the bidding of the imperial interests of that large state. However, there was also the Department of Ideology, meaning Yakovlev. They were the driving force behind perestroika. To be honest, no one outside the USSR was willing to believe these things.
Oli see, kes viis perestroikat läbi. Ja kui nii aus olla, välismaal ei uskunud seda keegi.
Estonia had reached a decisive point. How to attain independence, should this be done within the legal framework of the USSR, breaking away from the Soviet Union as one of her successor states, or by staying on the path of Estonia's uninterrupted legal continuity, which neither occupation nor annexation had succeeded in destroying? The question of the moment was how to restore independence in reality, de facto. The Congress of Estonia, which represented Estonia's citizens, and the restitutional approach did not try to assume power, for that wasn't a realistic option. Instead, it declared the beginning of a period of transition that would restore independence.
Well,
that angle of legal continuity is right, of course. I have no desire to quarrel with you about that. Still, let's go back in time and think about the ramifications of that ideology. To say that we are right and we're occupied, and that we have the Tartu Peace Treaty to rely on and agreed upon borders from that point in history, and we are now going to elect a body that represents our citizens, and this body has the right to assume power, because there was talk of taking power. And then we're going to go to Moscow, and in Moscow they're going to understand that we really are the representatives of our citizens on the basis of legal continuity, and then we are going to be received and they are going to negotiate with us, and the result will be independence for Estonia. Well, in my opinion, and probably in the opinion of other Popular Front leaders, that path would have gone nowhere. Moscow would only have been open to discussions with some sort of a structure that had been formed on the basis of the laws of the Soviet Union at that point in time. From the word go, the citizens' committees were a renegade organization from Moscow's point of view. Not from our perspective, but from Moscow's point of view. Even now, in 2003, they are still not willing to admit that they occupied us, that the border should be in a different location where it was previously. If these things haven't been done by now, why should anyone think that they would have done so in 1989?
Miks peaks keegi arvama, et seda pidi tegema 89. aastal?
Persons who had arrived with the forces of occupation took part of electing the 12th Supreme Soviet, and they were also among the candidates elected. Even so, this Supreme Soviet recognized the Congress of Estonia as the representative body of the citizens of Estonia and the structure engaged in restoring the authority of the state, and it passed a decision of restitution. This entailed the uncoupling of Estonia from the Soviet system and signified the beginning of the period of transition. At the beginning, we didn't really believe that it would be possible to become independent in, let's say, the year 1991. That seemed outside the realm of doability. Our idea was to keep strengthening the status of the Republic. The project basically had two aspects. One of these involved the tax that we had to pay to the Union. A lot of discussion was devoted to that, and it seemed that if you belonged somewhere, it wouldn't be appropriate to not pay. So the question was, on what basis, and calculations were made to come up with a formula that would enable us to pay as little as possible. The other topic was that of military forces. We discussed the creation of an Estonian army at that same session of the Deliberative Council for Economic Self-Sufficiency. It took a certain amount of courage to discuss these things, and it was foolhardy as well, since, to be honest, too many people were present to discuss such a delicate issue. During times of radical change, appearances of reality are not all that important. The ability to see farther, to perceive the reality of what tomorrow will bring is important. Nationally minded democratic circles in Estonia believed that the point had been passed where it might be possible to save the Soviet Union by reforming it. We saw an opportunity in this. Consequently, we set our sights on an all-out effort, on total freedom. On the 14th of May, the President of the Soviet Union, Gorbachev, announced that the decisions of the Supreme Soviets of Estonia and Latvia concerning independence were invalid. On the following day, the Inner Movement held a demonstration on Toompea, the seat of Estonia's government, with the goal of tearing down the Estonian flag and running up the red flag. The Supreme Soviet of the Estonian SSR had restored the name of the Republic of Estonia and divested itself of the symbols of the Soviet Union, the flag, the coat of arms, and the anthem. Prime Minister Savisaar appeared in a radio broadcast and called on the people to come to the assistance of the government to repel the tumultuous attackers. The attempted tour de force of the Inner Movement failed. Moscow felt that it was high time to tame the Baltic countries. In April 1989, demonstrators had been bloodied in Tbilisi. Now the Gulf War was beginning in Kuwait, and it was expected that the attention of the world would be focused on the Middle East. They tried to goad us into spilling blood here. In Latvia and Lithuania, they set up so-called committees of national salvation, which were urged on by Moscow. They were told, pull out all the stops. In 3 days we will recognize you. You will become the leaders of the Republic. Later they were pushed aside, blood flowed, and they were simply discarded. Judgment is still being passed on them. They are being imprisoned. Our situation was like that when Yarovoi held a meeting with us